Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Way of the Rosary podcast. My name is Shannon Wendt, your host, the founder of the Way of the Rosary podcast and community and ChooseLife.com. So excited to have you guys back here with us for another episode. We're getting so close to wrapping up this series. I cannot believe it, but here we are. We are at our second to last episode. Today, we are continuing in the Luminous Mysteries. We're going to be talking about the Transfiguration, the spiritual fruit, or the fruit of spiritual courage. And the saint that we're learning all of this from today is none other than the great Saint Clare of Assisi, which, if you know a little bit of her life, then it's quite obvious. But if you don't know much about her life, other than maybe she was a friend of St. Francis, you are in for a treat because this incredible saint has so much to teach us about spiritual courage. I want to begin by talking about what spiritual courage is, kind of what it's not, how this is connected to the Transfiguration, and then that'll lead us into the incredible lesson from St. Clare. So in the Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John had this incredible experience really encountering Jesus, really truly seeing him in literally a new light. They'd been working alongside Jesus tirelessly, day after day, week after week, city after city. And this was kind of for them, this encounter with Jesus was renewing for them. It was something that was for them this pivotal moment where they really had this different experience of Jesus glorified. And for us, it's very much the same. We encounter Jesus. We experience his glory. And that is what gives us courage. And that's kind of like, in short, the journey of the Christian life. We come to some kind of knowledge at some point in our life of Jesus and we encounter him. And we have opportunities throughout our life to encounter him again. And it isn't until we experience Jesus where we really have this understanding of glory for ourselves, not just book knowledge that we learn about, but where we experience this in our own lives. And this begins this foundational part of our life as a Christian. And that's kind of the background for the Transfiguration and the fruit of spiritual courage. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about what spiritual courage is and how it differs from kind of traditional courage, what we normally think of as courage. Traditional courage could be said that it is kind of, sort of puffing oneself up, kind of feeling bigger than we are, feeling stronger. And it's a feeling that is kind of built on ourselves. And spiritual courage is actually a bit the opposite, kind of the interior part of it is very much opposite. The exterior look of it might look very much the same though. And this difference really comes in that interior part with spiritual courage, because with spiritual courage, we're not puffing ourselves up. We're not kind of, puffing ourselves up to look better, be bigger. Spiritual courage is really where we become smaller. We rely more. We trust the Lord. And it's this becoming littler that allows the Lord to really step in and do something incredible. It's being little and trusting to know that I am not in control. I cannot conquer this thing. I'm not strong enough. I'm not big enough. But Lord, I know that you are. And even if in this courage, even if I'm conquered by this thing that I'm afraid of or I'm tempted to be afraid of, even if I'm conquered by that, Lord, I know that you are still good and you still have me covered. You will still take care of me like a father takes care of his beloved child. That is true spiritual courage. Traditional courage is rooted in the hope of a particular outcome. And spiritual courage is rooted in the hope of God's guaranteed outcome. Now, does God guarantee us the kind of outcome that we have in our mind? No, no way. But the ultimate outcome, where God wins, where when we live our life in union with Him, we get to spend eternity with Him, that is the guaranteed outcome. Not that our salvation is guaranteed. Don't get that mixed up here. But that God wins. And that when we follow Him, when we choose Him daily, when we choose to be little and to be His child, then we can really stand on this courage, this confidence in the Lord's love, in His providence, and in His goodness. So I want to say that again. Traditional courage is rooted in our hope of a particular outcome, and spiritual courage is rooted in God's guaranteed outcome. He wins. And that's what we can have courage in. Last week we talked about the fruit of the desire of holiness, the desire for holiness. And we said that the desire for holiness is made deeper in courage to hope. And that's what this is. We can have courage because of our hope and where we place that. And it's this journey. Desire for holiness is what propels us along this journey. And this is what Peter, James, and John really began to understand at the Transfiguration. I'm sure within their ministry, they'd had a lot of ups and downs. There was probably a lot of things that didn't turn out the way that they planned. And maybe there was even times when their hope faltered. And the Transfiguration was this experience of the glory of God so that they could have this firm foundation of courage for whatever was to come. And of course, now with the perspective of history, we know what they went through. We know that Peter and James were martyred, and John had a long road of witness and support and caring for Our Lady. All of these definitely give us reason. And of course, more immediately than even their own death, they witnessed the death of Jesus. And they were able to, even though we know Peter faltered, he was able to reclaim his spiritual courage because he knew what the outcome would be. No matter how bleak it looked at the cross, no matter how bleak it looked for him in his own crucifixion upside down, he was firmly rooted in hope. And this is what allows us to have spiritual courage. And this is what gave St. Clare of Assisi the ability to stand up against invading barbarians. And this is quite an incredible story. And we had the blessing like a year and a half ago. Our school did this, what was it called? Candle in Umbria is the name of the play. And it's this story of St. Clare. So we got this beautiful glimpse into the life of St. Clare. And this scene of the invasion of the Saracens is quite powerful. And really, what St. Clare did is actually, in reality, different than how it's portrayed and even more courageous, especially when we think about courage in this context that we've been talking about, spiritual courage in terms of littleness. So I'll tell you the story. St. Clare, of course, we know, she lived with her sisters in San Damiano, which was this monastery that St. Francis founded. And the sisters were cloistered and devoted themselves to prayer and adoration. And the Saracens were barbarians. King Frederick II ordered them to invade Assisi, to take it over by force. And San Damiano was the first, and it very much looked like a stronghold. It was a monastery, but definitely a very strategic place to take over from which to kind of be the base of operations. So the Saracens had their eyes set on San Damiano, and they invaded, they scaled the walls, and they're coming in. And at this point, St. Clare is very ill on her deathbed. And the sisters come to her in terror to tell her that they are being invaded right now. And St. Clare has the sisters bring Jesus to her in a pyx and carry her out to the gate that they are trying to burst their way through. And in the play, and if you see pictures of this, St. Clare looks strong, and she is standing at the gates or standing on kind of a parapet holding up the monstrance, which is a beautiful image. And I think it does very much encapsulate what's happening. But the reality, and this is one of the biographers who wrote about what actually happened, St. Clare, weak with illness, but also weak in just acknowledging her own poverty. I should back up. She had this beautiful conversation with the Lord when the sisters came. So this is before they carried her out to the gates. This is important. I can't believe I almost skipped this. That would have been so sad. So St. Clare had this prayer, and she really begged the Lord, and she said, "Behold, my Lord, is it possible you want to deliver into the hands of pagans your defenseless handmaids, whom I have taught out of love for you? I pray, Lord, protect these your handmaids, who I cannot now save by myself." That was her prayer. Absolute poverty and a recognition of her own littleness. She said, I cannot save them myself. And from the pyx that the sisters had brought her, the child Jesus, little Jesus, not Jesus the conqueror, the child Jesus spoke to her, and he said, I will always protect you. And if you read the biography, it's incredible. You know, there's a bit more talking about the city and how the Lord will protect them. But this is the important part, that St. Clare didn't ask for the strength to fight them off. She didn't ask for the weapons. She asked for the Lord to do it. She recognized her own littleness, her own poverty, her own inability to solve this problem. And like a child, she gave everything. She gave her whole life in that moment, which she'd already done, but in a profound way, in an immediate way, she knew that death might be very close. She laid it all on the line. And Jesus promised her that he would always protect her. And now in that moment, did St. Clare know that Jesus meant to protect her bodily, physically? No. She still trusted, because he might have meant that he's protecting her spiritually or generally or in some other way. It wasn't a guarantee of success that day, but her reliance on Christ and her trust to know that no matter what happens, the Lord has me. That is true courage. Okay, so then they carry St. Clare out to the gate that the Saracens are literally beating down at this moment. And she lays prostrate on the ground, holding up the pyx in front of her. Now, of course, I love the image of her standing boldly, strong and with the monstrance in hand. But in reality, it was the small pyx, and she was laying prostrate, utterly vulnerable. Not even standing up ready to fight, totally and completely reliant on the Lord. And what happened? The Saracens broke through the door, and the moment they laid eyes on Clare and the sisters, who were filled with spiritual confidence, they could see this spiritual courage on their faces, and they saw Jesus in the Eucharist, in the pyx. They were filled with fear, and they turned around and ran, and they didn't come back. Of course, we know this as one of the incredible miracles of St. Clare's life. But what we all can take from this is the littleness of Claire in that moment, the littleness in the face of such incredible danger. And, the practical side of this, what I want us to really take into our day and into our week is this fear of being overwhelmed, right? Are we likely to be invaded by barbarians? No. But do we regularly face the overwhelming forces that attempt to do what the barbarians were attempting to do with the sisters and drag them away from the mission of God? Are we often threatened by those kind of overwhelming forces of our to-do list and the demands of our daily lives? Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in our life that threatens to overwhelm us and pull us away from that cloister within our heart that is reserved for us and the Lord, to distract us and to knock us off mission. Jesus is always before us. Like Claire held Jesus before her in the face of the Saracens. And when we position ourselves in that same way that Claire did, we don't have to physically lay down, but in that idea of putting Christ before us in our day and just laying it all out, utterly vulnerable to the Lord, giving all of it to the Lord. Recently, a priest suggested to me that I start praying with my day planner, with my schedule each morning. And I love that idea. And I think that is really, when we pray with our plans for the day, with the idea in our mind of the posture of Saint Claire, Jesus before us, and then as little as we can possibly be in this day, Lord, take all of it and do with it what you will. I know that you've got me. That kind of courage will carry us through each and every day, no matter what threatens to overwhelm us. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us once again. Next week will be our final episode in this series, and then we are going to have a series on the sorrowful mysteries, or the Our Lady's 7 Sorrows. We're going to be talking about those in our next series, but we are not finished yet with the fruit of the Rosary. One more episode next week. We're going to be talking about the institution of the Eucharist and the fruit of Eucharistic adoration. All right, guys, have an awesome week. If you have not yet checked out the latest updates of the Way of the Rosary book that is coming out, available for pre-sale on October 1st, make sure that you check out chooselife.com, and the Way of the Rosary tab and the book launch is under there, and you can see all the updates. Enter our VIP list. We are giving away an incredible prize pack every single week to those who are signed up on that VIP list. All right, guys, have an awesome week. God bless.